Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Avatar The Last Airbender Team Avatar Tales. So this book was released 13 days ago in comic book stores, and today is the digital release date where you'll be able to get it from typical places like Amazon and stuff like that, and in regular bookstores. So this is the mass market release date today. Had a bit of trouble getting my hands on the book, that's why I've had to wait until today to actually get a hold of the book. But yeah, here we go with the review. So I think immediately I want to just make it clear here, just straight up at the start, my general impressions, my recommendation is that I think this is the first Dark Horse Avatar comic that I wouldn't really recommend. I really think this isn't a book most fans need. You don't need to spend your money on this book, except in a few scenarios, if you care about certain things in this book. So the other caveat I want to say before I get into the review is that I will not be taking into account the quality of the 3 free comic book day stories in terms of the review of this book, because those books were obviously released previously. They were free comic book days. I've covered them before. A lot of fans will have already seen Rebound, Shells, and Sisters before. The only thing about those books that I will include in my review of this is purely the fact that they are collected here in a kind of mass release book for the first time. So for a lot of people, this is going to be the main way to get a hold of them. I myself only had one of those books from Free Comic Book Day. The other 2 I couldn't actually get. So this is actually my first time having a physical copy of 2 of those 3 stories. So I will definitely give the book some points for having the reprint, but I don't think it is fair with this book to include the quality of those stories in overall my review of the quality of this as a piece of Avatar content. So most of the review will be on the new stories and how they work, and then it will get some points just for reprinting the others. So getting into it, why don't I really recommend it? One, it's a very short book. Taking into account you have 3 on the longer side of short story comics here. There's only about 35 or so new pages of new content in this book. The stories that we do get, quite simply, just don't have any substance to them. There's nothing particularly eventful or notable that happens in any of the new stories, and it really makes me question what happened with this book. Because I'm talking about this, obviously, in October 2019. This book was originally announced as coming out in September 2018. This book has been delayed by over a year. And I don't know why or how that happened. Considering, like I said, there's only like 30 or so pages of new content, and considering you have like so many different creators working on this, like a different creative team effectively for every single one of these short stories, and we know from like when preview pages came out and stuff like that, that a bunch of these were done as of like many months ago. Like, what is the reason for why this book was so delayed? Why is it taken over a year for this to happen? In that there's so little substance to any of the stories that I can't think it's anything in the writing department in terms of getting approval to do this or that, because everything here is so like not consequential. So was it art direction that usually has to go through Brian and him not being happy with maybe some of this stuff? I'm not even sure on that front, because these type of books are where you sort of let the unique art styles sort of kind of fly and just let them kind of shine on their own. And I doubt Brian would want to take such a large role and having to deal with so many different artists. So I just fundamentally don't get where that like 13 or so month delay comes from with this book, because there's so little to it. And I'm kind of wondering, like, is it on the editing side of things? Was it just a challenge to have to deal with so many different creative teams and put the book together, or what? I'm really not sure. But like I said, the only real positives I can take from this book is that It's great to have Rebound in physical copy. It's great to have, Shells in physical copy, even though I already had that comic already. And it's nice to have Sisters as well. The rest of the book, I don't really particularly care about what happens in the rest of these comics, and I don't think a lot of fans will either. Like, I think the best thing you can say about the other comics is that they're kind of fun little stories with the characters, but if that's all that we have to say, what are we actually saying? That there's Avatar content and the characters were written in character, that the writers didn't make a mistake and write the characters out of character, and we're praising the book just for doing that. It's not good enough to just, I think, with Avatar at this point in time, 2019 Avatar, to just put out pages of comic featuring Avatar characters and there be nothing to it, really. That's ultimately where I'd stand on this, and I'd really treat this book as a huge missed opportunity, in that I think what we really need right now, with some of the more recent actual comics, like Imbalance and before that North and South, not being the most discussed books because they've been taking the story in a certain direction. This book was an opportunity to cover a lot of different ground, to have a collection of short stories where one takes place here, one takes place here, tell loads of different types of stories. But in reality, this book kind of doesn't really tell any story. It's all just these very, very minor scenarios, and I don't think it works. And I think it's very telling that the 3 free comics which are reprinted, the quality of them is 10 times above the quality of any of the new books. And I think there's one thing that really highlighted there is that the one unique thing across all 3 of the one common thing across all 3 of the collected books is that they're all written by Gene Yang, whereas none of the books here are written by Gene Yang. They're all written by kind of different kind of new people, pretty much. And I think that's kind of somewhat telling that in so many ways, all this book kind of is sort of a showcase of some new artists and new writers for Avatar. But it's not much of a showcase because they don't do that much. I think the artists, of course, will obviously get their chance to shine because they're getting to draw the characters regardless of what scenarios that they're in. But the writers, I feel like I don't know how to judge them based off their stories here, in that, oh, the guy wrote the Scarecrow story, I don't know if I'd want to see you write an actual full book because you wrote such a basic story. It's just okay, you know how to, in a very basic sense, write the Avatar characters, but what does that tell me about you actually doing something important with the story or characters and stuff like that? I don't really think it says all that much. And that's the major problem with this book, is just a severe lack of any sort of substance, any sort of notable moments in this. And it's incredible that this was done so wrong in so many ways, when the first Dark Horse Avatar comic was also an anthology collection, The Lost Adventures. And this was an excellent collection of stories. Now, to be fair, this book is 3 times the length of this book. Actually more than 3 times the length, because I thought that this was going to be a 72-page comic, but it's actually 72 pages including all the credits stuff, so it's actually only about 66 pages. So it's even shorter than I expected, whereas this is I think it's 216 if you just include the entire kind of content of the book. But it's 3 times the page count, but it's about 10-20 times the amount of interesting stuff that happens here. And I think the big difference can be really said in just the way that the book kind of highlights why you should buy each of these. It's very, very telling. So with Team Avatar Tales, it says here, journey along with Team Avatar as they rescue a pumpkin farmer waylaid by monsters, go undercover in the Fire Nation, help an old rival with a hair-raising problem, and reflect on what it means to save the world. That's the description. They're the things the back of the book is telling you why you should buy this book, is because pumpkin farmer, undercover in the Fire Nation, old rival, hair-raising problem, and reflecting on what it means to save the world. What does the Lost Adventures do? Is it so vague? No. On the back of the book here, it says, where did the last of the airbenders hide? When was Zuko and May's first kiss? Who would win in an earthbending showdown, Toph or King Boomy? And why did the Earth King decide to travel the world in disguise? All this, plus we reveal the secrets of sword bending, show you how the hottest game in the Fire Nation is played, and uncover what happened on one of Aang's earliest adventures when he and his friend Kuzan went hunting for dragons. It's night and day. And here's the thing, if they had done the stories in a different way in this book, they could have had a blurb on the back with stuff like that to it, but it just doesn't attempt to do anything like that. Like, just the list of stuff on the back of the Lost Adventures is so interesting, like shipping stuff that people care about. One of the few times in the entire franchise where they're actually addressing stuff related to the Air Nomad genocide. A big fantasy fight scenario, Toph versus King Boomy. Where did Earth King Quay go when he kind of left at the end of, book 2 and stuff like that. And all that sort of stuff, like a flashback to like pre-Iceberg Aang with his friend Kuzan. That's really, really, really interesting stuff. And then they're so vague here about like pumpkin farmers and undercover in the Fire Nation. And it seems like, oh, that could be interesting. But then you read the books and there's nothing to it. So let's actually get into the stories here. Here's the contents page. You can see here, it starts off with Rebound, then there's the Substitute, Shells, then Sokka's Poem, Toph and the Boulder, Origami, Sisters, and the Scarecrow. So, taking out the 3 free comic book day books, as you would expect, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new comics. And Sokka's Poem is just a 2-page story, if you can even call it that. So it's effectively, like, I wouldn't even call it a story, pretty much. And, this book has stuff like that. Like, there's the 2 or 3 page story of, like, Aang sneezing and stuff like that. But it has enough otherwise to make up for that. Here, you're pretty much down to, straight away, 4 stories. So, The Substitute, what is that about? And I think it starts off on a pretty bad note. I think The Substitute is probably where we see some of the best art of the new artist here, with illustrated and lettered by Little Corvus. But I think the writing here isn't particularly good, or it's just really lacking in creativity. What The Substitute is about is effectively, it's set in early book 3, when the team are obviously undercover in the Fire Nation, so they're all wearing their Fire Nation outfits. I suppose it's in or around the time of the headband, and that, like, you see the group there has all their outfits and stuff like that. And basically, the group just decide that they want snacks, so Sokka's going to go out, and even though he's already undercover, he feels the need to, like, go double undercover, so he puts a mustache on, as you can see here. And the main issue that I have with this book is just that this is so similar to the story in The Lost Adventures with Wang Fire, where it's one of Sokka's disguises gets him sort of discovered as, like, being the real thing. Like, so he's going undercover as a Fire Nation soldier, but he actually gets drafted as a Fire Nation soldier. And that was a good story because of what they did with it and the humor throughout it. Here he puts on a different mustache, gets discovered as a teacher, and then has a weird interaction with some students. And they don't really try and connect the dots between, like, the school from the headband and the school here. It's just Sokka goes in there, he ends up looking pretty much exactly like the teacher. He's asked, like, oh, you're the substitute teacher, you have to take over. The students are sort of rowdy, they won't listen to him, and the only way he can get some control over the class is to, instead of buying the kind of sweets and treats for himself and his friends, Team Avatar, he buys the sweets for the kids, and this ends up actually calming them down, and it just ends with, like, Sokka coming back and being like, children, and he wasn't able to get the group their sweets. It's just, wow, so uncreative, taking the school idea again, but doing nothing with it. Taking the Sokka disguise idea, which is an aspect of his character, but doing nothing unique with it. And it just makes for like a... How many pages is this? It just makes for a like 8 or so page comic where nothing particularly new happens in it. And I think that's just the height of like uncreative writing. That's the best you could do, is effectively copying a story from one of the previous books, but like, oh, he's got a slightly different facial hair combination this time, and instead of getting discovered as a soldier, he's discovered as a teacher, and they don't even do anything unique with it that way. So, you know, some pretty big problems with that one. Second one, as I said before, is Sokka's poem. It's a very quick 2-page story. They released this as preview pages before. You guys have probably seen it before. It's just a poem by Sokka. The most unique thing about this story is that it's art by Gene Yang for this one. He doesn't write this story, but he does do the art for it. And you get to see his unique art style because, of course, he's not just a writer. He does the art on some of his other books that he's done before. And he's got a pretty unique style, and it does a decent job here. The problem here is just that it's kind of just a recap of his life made into a kind of poem. And again, it doesn't say anything. It's just... I'll actually read out the whole thing. Oh, I know, Sokka and his dumb jokes. Sokka who lost his girlfriend to the moon. Sokka who can't even bend paper except with his mitts. But at the risk of blowing my own horn, who rescued Suki from the prison at Boiling Rock? Who defeated the wolf spirit? Well, sort of. Lots of battles to fight, lots of strategies to craft. It's a busy life. But then night comes, the air is still, the water is placid, the fire banked, the earth dense and unyielding. No one is combining his soul with his spirit. No one is reincarnating. No one is kidnapped. Everything sleeps. Even Toph's eyes close, making her constant darkness that much darker. Everyone vulnerable, barefoot and drowsy. This is me at my best. When people I love or revere or both need me, whenever they know it or not. I almost never sleep. There's too much to do and only I can do it. The end. And it's just like, what was this story? It's like... Sokka, like, there's a little incident here where, like, clearly at the very start, the group encountered the pirates again, and they end up pretty quickly capturing the kind of pirate captain again. And then the group goes to camp out, and Sokka is just like, this is me in my element, like, being watch for the group while we're asleep. It's just like, okay, fair enough, and it's fine, like, but again, it doesn't really say much, like, is there anything inherently like that we didn't know about Sokka here? Is it even saying anything about stuff that we did know about Sokka? It's just a bunch of little references, and the best thing you can probably say here is that there's a nice reference to the search there with the wolf spirit, because it's, you know, I suppose the writer in this case knew that it was Gene Yang probably doing the art, and so threw in that reference. Pretty cool. But, you know, it's just a 2-page story there's not much to. And for something that they were really highlighting here of like Gene Yang's first time on art for Avatar, it's just a little bit disappointing. They could have done a little bit more. Story number 3 is Toph and the Boulder, which I will definitely say is probably the best of the new stories, because I feel at the very least it's sort of, this was one where like the writer sort of grasped, I think, sort of what these stories like should have been trying to do, and that is linking onto a sort of unique dynamic, having a lot of fun with it, and just really committing to that and then devoting the time to it. So in this case, obviously, Toph and the Boulder. Really fun dynamic that we saw from the show, but getting more of it because, of course, you know, Toph was with the Earth Rumble for a while, so of course she has, like, deeper relationships than we saw with the Earth Rumble, kind of rest of the people, including the Boulder, who obviously came back, and they were kind of even closer with them then as part of like the invasion. So it makes sense to go back to it that Toph would have a friendship with, I suppose, someone like the Boulder, given how tough the two of them are. So, you know, the Boulder's a very fun, unique character, and it fits this style of book to have a story sort of focused on him. And it has a very kind of like over-the-top art style here, and in general the story is very like, you know, heavy, big reactions to things, because what it's about is like, arguably this story should have been called like The Boulder and His Cat rather than Toph and the Boulder, because it's just like, it's Toph just like experiencing the Boulder interact with his cat and like discovering this aspect of him. And the main thing with the Boulder you learn here is just that he tries to, because he's effectively a professional wrestler, like the Avatar's world equivalent of a professional wrestler, he has to keep the aura of his character alive. So he can't let people know that he really, really, really cares about his croco cat. So it's a part crocodile, part cat that he has here. And he's really, like, you can see here, sort of loving towards the cat. And that goes sort of completely against his, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, type persona and stuff like that. The question here is, there's something wrong with the cat. It keeps meowing a lot, won't stop making noise, is eating relentlessly just over and over again, and is kind of quick to anger. So Toph is like, should you bring it to the vet? And the Boulder's just like, I've tried, but let's just say the Pebble, which is the name of the cat, has been very convincing about why we shouldn't go there. So they figure, okay, let's change the food. Maybe the cat needs better cat food. And the cat just eats it all, no change. Then they go to get fresh food, so they catch some fish. The cat just immediately eats the whole fish. And again, it's like, whoa, where's it putting all this food? The cat kind of goes missing a little bit. Toph uses her seismic sense to find the cat and realizes, oh, there's a mistake here. You think it's a male cat, it's actually a female cat, and they discovered that actually the Pebble was pregnant and has now given birth to a couple of baby croco cats. So, Toph is just like, oh, that explains it. It's a she and a mom. That explains the insatiable hunger. She was bulking up so she could feed these little guys. That makes you a grandpa. And the Boulder is on the ground, dealing with his emotions. The Boulder is just allergic to emotions. And he's like, Toph, before you leave, you can't tell anyone about the Boulder's you'll ruin the Boulder's reputation. And Toph is just like, I didn't see a thing, and it's a blind joke. And the Boulder has a great reaction of just like, what are you talking about? Oh, I get it. So, and then I think this is the thing that really, I think, confirms that there was actually something to this story. They cut to an Earth Rumble at some point. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone else, it's been the moment we've all been waiting for. The Boulder and the reigning champ, the Blind Bandit, have squared off yet again. And the Boulder actually tries to sort of, just come out and be clear about everything, that, you think I'm this type of person, but I've held back this side of me because it's affected my image, but it's truly important to me. It's not something to be ashamed of. Let's give it up for the Boulder's #1 fans. And he points up to the audience, and there's the Pebble and the Pebblets, the kids there in the audience. And he's like, with their support, the Boulder can't lose. And Toph just immediately KOs him with one attack, and that's the end of the book. So I think that's very in line with sort of the book, the thing I'd expect from most of the stories out of this. And I think it was actually done quite well. This in many ways felt similar to a couple of the, not the best comics from the Lost Adventures, but some of those type of ones of like, that felt like somewhat similar on the lines of It's Only Natural, the one where we learn about like where King Kwai went. Something like A Combustion Man on a Train, where we don't learn a ton about Combustion Man, but just getting more time with him, a different scenario, it's kind of interesting. So, that was much more in line of what I wanted. Next we move on to the book called Origami, which is interesting in that it's written, illustrated, and lettered, so the entire book is done by Kiku Hughes. The art style is very interesting, and I really like the way the panels are done, as you can see here. Like the kind of graphical style of this, of just the white background, and then each panel has like the curved edges and stuff like that. It feels really nice to look at for sure, and I do like the art style. I think it's of the art styles in this book, I think it's definitely my favorite one, and I'd like to see more of Kiku Hughes on art and so on. And then what I'll say about the writing on this story is at least it's all the other stories take a very comedy focus. They take a very it's not meant to be taken seriously at all approach. This one is the only story outside of course, the 3 free Comic Book Day books that takes a sort of serious approach to telling a story. Again, it's not particularly eventful what happens here, and it sort of has the problem of being set in like book 1 / early book 2, like very early in the series, whereas I think most people were excited for this book because it was like, it seemingly was set up to be mostly post-series stuff. So there's a bit of a disappointment there of like, it's Fire Nation attacking an Earth Kingdom town. Katara goes in and saves a father and his child from the firebenders. They thank the group by inviting them back to their house. And effectively what it is here is it's just, you know, a nice, you know, conversation over dinner with this family. So there's mother, the father, and their daughter. And the reason the story is called Origami is because it's real that the daughter, her big talent is, you know, paper bending or origami. And Katara is very impressed by this, and she's just kind of like, no, you don't actually think it's that great. You know, you're like an amazing fighter. Like, you kind of inspire hope in people and stuff like that. This is nothing like that, effectively. She says, you know, you're just being polite. I know you've done so much to help people all the time. People like my dad. You don't have to just wait around and hope that things get better. And Katara just says, actually, I have to wait and hope for things to get better all the time. I've got to stay optimistic even when things are scary and seem impossible. You can't win a war with fighting alone. Hope is more powerful than you might think. Honestly, I wish I had more of it sometimes. And it's just meant to be this little back and forth between Katara and this character, whose name is Chio. And it's just meant to be like, Katara had a somewhat interesting, you know, she left something in a way with Chio, just her words kind of inspired her a little bit. And Chio gives Katara a pretty nice origami crane and says that the crane is a symbol of luck and peace. As you work for peace, may it give you protection, luck, and most of all, hope. And they hug, and that's really it. It's just a little, they help an Earth Kingdom town. One family thanks them. The girl kind of does origami, and it's just meant to be this kind of symbolic thing, but mainly the focus here is just, you know, origami. In one way, I'm kind of like, it is at least solid, because it is the most sort of sincere of all of the stories, but there's not a lot to it here. This really felt like the writer was just like, what will I write my story about? Oh, I like origami. I'll just include origami in this somehow and write a story based around origami. And it's like, it doesn't really add that much to anything. And it's just like, the art is so good. And I actually think the kind of more sincere dialogue is actually quite well done. It's just in a very like uneventful story that I don't know what really to make of it. But I kind of be like, if we have to bring in more creators for like books, I'm kind of like, yeah, Kiku Hughes, yeah, like there's some potential here if we cover some more important ground. Last story in the book is the Scarecrow, which has the most cartoony art style in the entire book, but it sort of fits for what the story is. Because this again isn't a story to be taken particularly seriously. It's literally just the group for some reason is just like in a pumpkin field, and like Momo gets sort of found out by the farmer of this pumpkin patch, and he thinks that Momo's been the one kind of like attacking all of his pumpkins and stuff like that. So they decide, oh, we'll actually help you out, old guy, and we'll get you a scarecrow so like you'll actually scare away these monsters. And they decide that Sokka, of course, is the one who is going to have to be the living scarecrow as they investigate what exactly is going on. And they just decide, oh, we'll also have Sokka wear a pumpkin on his head to make him look weird and stuff like that. So it's basically just a joke for like Aang to put a pumpkin on Sokka's head. And so they wait around and they discover that, okay, the things that are attacking the pumpkins are actually these animals called raccoon crows, which are quite interesting. You can see them up top there. I think they missed an opportunity here to just kind of like have an animal that's like cat bat or something like that, something fun. But you know, raccoon crow, it's somewhat interesting. And yeah, Sokka freaks out and he scares them off, and it's revealed that, oh, a scarecrow that moves is the best way to actually get them to kind of leave. And so they kind of come up with a bit of a kind of a contraption here. They kind of strap some rope up to it, and they put it next to the water supply for the field. And it's like, okay, so where there's some wind, or something comes close to it, it'll move, and it's just they make a sort of automatic Scarecrow. And it's just fun times at the end of they help this pumpkin farmer, and that's really it. It's all about just like this sort of fun scenario, sort of let's make fun of Sokka as a Scarecrow. That's really all there is to say here. Really not a lot. A very, very unambitious story. The art, I'm not like, it's not that like I hate stories that don't have anything to them. I think an art style like this works for, the one or maybe two stories that you tell in the book where you're only trying to tell a very simple like dynamic. And I think the art style actually worked for that, but it is an art style I don't know how much exactly I'd want to see more of it. So we end up in this pretty interesting situation where the three stories that we've already had before are just so far above everything else. Like, Rebound is far and away the best comic in this book, because it's so important to Smoke and Shadow. It's borderline like required reading before you read Smoke and Shadow. It's so important and well done. Shells, I would say, is the second best comic in the book because it's Sokka and Suki interactions, plus you get the backstory and the Kyoshi warriors in there. And I think it also it effectively does exactly what Origami does with Suki and the girl in that book. You have the same sort of dynamic between those two characters that you do between Katara and the girl in Origami. So it like that's another thing with Origami is it felt like it did the same thing more or less as part of what Shells already did. And then Sisters is definitely the third best comic in the book. Just getting to see Ty Lee's sisters, her identical sisters, seeing Toph and Ty Lee interact, it's a very unique dynamic type thing. And then of the rest of the books, like I said, I'd say Toph and the Boulder is the fourth best book. Then Origami. Then let's see, what else do we have here? Substitute is a Scarecrow, which is actually better. I said the Scarecrow is a little bit more fun. Then the Substitute, then Sokka's Poem. Sokka's Poem is just on the bottom because it's so short. There's not a lot to say about it, but yeah, it's I can't really recommend this book unless you like myself needed a physical copy of Rebound, Shells, and Sisters. That to me is the only major reason for anyone to buy this book, unless you're just a hardcore fan collector who was going to buy any piece of Avatar merchandise that's new. That's the situation that I'm in, and that I was always going to get this book pretty much regardless of what the quality is. But if you care at all about quality, if you're not someone who just buys everything by default, there's nothing really here for you, because if you don't care about having the books completely in physical copy, all of the free Comic Book Day books were available officially free digitally after the year they came out, the free Comic Book Day year that they came out, and they haven't been hard to find just to read, full stop. So it's really only here to get the physical copy if you absolutely needed it. I would definitely say if none of those reasons apply to you, you don't need to get this book for the new stories. Just like I explained, none of them are really worth buying this book for. I'd say if you don't have Lost Adventures, put the money you're putting aside to get this book into getting this one, because it's effectively, the prices are so similar. Like, this is like listed on the back, $10.99 for this, $14.99 for this. So for like $4 more, you get 3 times the length, so many more important stories. So if you don't have the Lost Adventures, the first book, which people sort of forget it exists, this is so much better than this. If you already do have that, but don't have some of the other merchandise, I'd say get Rise of Kyoshi. It's, I think, outside of ATLA and Korra as the shows, this is the best piece of Avatar storytelling we've got in the entire franchise. I think it's that good. And then, of course, I'd recommend all of the other Avatar and Korra comics ahead of this as well. So I definitely just say, get those. This is not really something that we need. Now, the final thing I'll say is just in terms of, I still like the idea of an anthology book. You just need to try and do a little bit more with the stories. Like, the amount of somewhat important incidents that can take place in a short amount of time that you could tell in these books. Do stuff like you did in this book, like it's just listed on the back here. If you really, like this book seems to suggest, had the ability to slot in anywhere in the middle of the show, ATLA, or anywhere afterwards where we're covering the comics right now, or like the Lost Adventures did and go back to even like pre-ATLA and like deal with Aang when he was younger, pre-Iceberg. Do some of that stuff. It just felt like there was no ambition here whatsoever. And I don't know if that's down to the writers. They might not have been allowed to by Dark Horse, by Mike O'Brien. They may not have want to have told any sort of an important story in this book. I don't think this is purely on the writers for just being very light with these stories. I think maybe it is a slight factor in some cases, but I think just all round there are problems with this book, and it just didn't come together. Like I said, where was the year delay? What happened during the year delay? Given that 3 of the books you were reprinting were done from the get-go. Gene Yang's 2-page story was done already. A year ago at New York Comic Con last year, we saw basically the entirety of Toph and the Boulder. So that only leaves like 2 or 3 of the remaining stories left. And I think we had already at least had an idea about some of them. Like we were hearing about aspects of the Scarecrow, and I don't know that would have taken 2 years effectively to put together. The same with The Substitute. I don't think that's a story that takes 2 years to put together. And same with Origami. So just a bit of a mess of a book here, and unfortunately in terms of like reviews, it's like 2 books in a row that I've had to be somewhat critical on because they haven't been that great. Imbalanced Part 3, now this. Thankfully, the next book, Ruins of the Empire Part 2, is shaping up very, very well, and I'm very excited to get my hands on that, to see what they do next with Kuvira and just all the dynamics that are going on in that book. So, expect a return to form for Avatar Comics with Ruins of the Empire, but yeah, unfortunately, Team Avatar Tales is a very skippable book. Of course, you know, if you're a collector like myself, get it by all means, but if you only want the important stuff, there's not a lot here. So that's the review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this book. And I think the main thing, more so than just like discussing the book, which of course I want to see you guys discuss in the comments below, discuss some ideas that you feel could have been done in like quick, 6 to 9-page stories, like they did in The Lost Adventures. What could they have put in here to make this book better? What are some ideas for shorter stories with more eventful plots that you think they could have done instead of these less than stellar books that we got? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.